Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Thank you once again for joining the podcast. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for coming back. For those of you that are new to the show, thank you for joining. Really love it. And if you do enjoy this episode, take a listen back to the first 15 episodes. Lots of amazing topics that I think you'll really, really enjoy. Very diverse set of topics about family, about Disney, about wrestling, about anything you could think of. If you have an idea for a future podcast that you'd like to hear about, or if you want to be a guest, check me out on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My DMs are open. Send me a message. Tell me what you'd like to do. Tell me if you want to be a guest. We can definitely set that up. We are available on YouTube at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. You can email the show directly at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. If you want to be an advertiser, just want to talk about whatever. If you want to make fun of my hat, that's fine. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can check me out over at jeffseltzer.com. Just a reminder, we are available on all podcast platforms. We have video on Spotify. We have video on YouTube. We have audio on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Pandora, pretty much any place that you could find the podcast, you can probably find us. If there's a place you can't find it, then shoot me a note, let me know. I'd love to see if I can get this podcast up on that platform. A couple of things that I want to bring up. Firstly, last week's show with Megan Fernandez, gotten a lot of great feedback about it. It was her return to the show for episode 15, as we talked about Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween. As a reminder, she was around in episode 2 when we talked about Disney World. Great feedback. Marcus Brandon, friend of the show, said after listening to 90 minutes of Megan Fernandez and myself talk, that's between episodes 2 and 15, he feels like he's great friends with us now, and he would love to have us plan his upcoming Disney trip. So if this podcast or whatever Megan does or whatever I do in real life doesn't work out, maybe Megan and I can open up a travel agency and help people like Marcus plan Disney trips. Daniel Ireland, another friend of mine, also talked about how great it was and how amazing he thought Megan was. So again, Megan, thank you so much for being on the show and for everything that you've done. With that said, before introducing our guest for this week, I did want to briefly talk about something that I have a lot of interest in and that really, really, I guess, makes me happy, you can say. So as many of you know, I really love movies. I have been a member of the AMC's A-list stubs thing probably for, I don't know, years and years at this point, which is basically you spend like $25 a month. You get up to 13 movies a month in theaters, 3 per week. Great deal. A few years ago when I was unemployed, it was fantastic. I was going to the movies like 3 times a week, seeing basically everything. Some movies I would see multiple times. What I wanted to do is talk about the movie experience now versus the movie experience, let's say, when I was a kid. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and going to the movies was very different than it is today. Back then, you'd go to the movies, you'd buy a ticket. When you got to the theater, you would hopefully have a couple of seats available next to each other. You'd fight for seats. If you got there too late, you'd sit in the front row and you'd crank your neck straight up looking at the screen. Not pleasant, but kind of was what it was, versus nowadays, you buy your ticket ahead of time. You know what seat you're going to sit at. You're guaranteed, a seat because you know where it's going to be. It's a more organized and a better planned out system. For anybody out there who knows anything about me, I am a bit of a planner. I've planned out the next 30, 40, 50 years of my life. So obviously, if you go to the movies the next week or two, that would definitely be planned out, something that I already know about. So for me, it's good. For other people who are more, let's say, spontaneous about going to the movies, not really as helpful or productive. But, to each his own, it works for me, I guess. Additionally, what's interesting too is just the overall how to see movies at home experience. So years ago, a movie would be in theaters. After it left theaters, you'd have to wait like 6 months to a year for it to either be on HBO or to be available at like the video store, at Blockbuster, RKO Video, or whatever. You'd wait all week to see a movie, go to this video store, go to the new releases, and just hope they have a copy in stock. If they didn't, you got to go to plan something else, figure something else out. Versus nowadays, you can, just turn on any streaming device. You can either rent a movie, buy a movie, or see whatever's already on streaming. So for me, I love the fact that, I already know when it's coming out. I know what I can see. I know it's going to be available. Additionally, nowadays, you can see movies probably 2-3 weeks after it hits theaters. You don't have to wait that year lag after Rocky IV was in theaters. You can already see the new Beetlejuice movie streaming at home right now. You can see that new Universal movie. I forget what it's called. It's an animated film. My buddy John talked about it, said it was great. Whatever it is. I'm sure Terrifier 3 will be on streaming probably in about a month or so. So, it just definitely makes your plans easier and makes it easier to kind of get the experience you're looking for. So at the end of the day, does it matter to anybody? I don't know. But for me, it makes me happy. And I guess that's all that counts to me here. With that said, I wanted to introduce my guest for this week. So I'd like to welcome to the show John Cevallos. John, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeff, and thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, of course. Thanks for joining. So before I give John a chance to give himself a little background, I want to talk about how John and I know each other. So let's go back to the year 2005. The location is Paterson, New Jersey. Not the most opportune place for two gentlemen in their mid to late 20s to meet, but that's how it happened. Both of us worked for different companies, but we were both on site at a certain grocery retailer, their offices. Happened to be sitting next to each other. And just over the course of a couple of weeks, just started talking about some shared interests, mixed martial arts, wrestling, all sorts of dumb stuff like that. And here we are 19 years later, and we're still friends. Crazy, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's amazing how that all came together, and the fact that we've stayed in touch for so long. Given that we've all moved companies and moved in and out of state and all kinds of things, and I'm really appreciative that we were able to hold that connection together.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I mean, again, I said it was 2005, which means, I mean, I do the math all the time. Like, I've known you now for 19 years, which is insane, right? So I'm 47 years old. So that means it's been more than what, like two-thirds of my adult life, which is insane. Like, my oldest daughter is 17. So obviously I've known you longer than I've known my daughter, which just blows my mind at this point. It's just so many things I could talk about, right? Like, Arrested Development came out the year that we met. Sopranos was only like, what, 5 seasons in at that point. The Office was like a season in, maybe 2 seasons at that point. So little things, just thinking about the fact that like our friendship or us knowing each other predates like so many things. It's just crazy to me.
And it also predates the AMP. Like we survived longer than AMP did at that point in time.
That's so true. So true. So yeah. So the grocery retailer that we did work at together, that we met at, was A&P, which is a Northeast grocery retailer, or it was, as they don't exist anymore, which is insane. They were around for like 100 years. They were well known in the Northeast. They eventually bought Pathmark, another fairly well-known grocery retailer, and they filed bankruptcy. I always make the joke that A&P buying Pathmark was like when Sears bought Kmart. It was like two prehistoric retailers that didn't know what they were doing, kind of merged and just kind of crashed very, very quickly. So it is really, really insane. So with that said, John, can you give us a real quick, brief bio on yourself? Like, who is John Cevallos?
Yeah, John Cevallos, and born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey. Matter of fact, so that job was in my backyard, which was fun. Born and raised in New Jersey. My career has taken me all over the U.S. I've been fortunate with the consumer packaged goods industry to move around to different places of the country. Lived in Miami, lived in San Francisco, lived in Minnesota, lived in Arkansas. Now I'm in Connecticut. Fortunate to have two young children. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And I've been married for almost 13 years now, and it's been a blast. And again, as you get older, right? I'm 47 years old now, and you look back at some of the relationships and the connections that you build over your course of your life, you start to realize the different things that they taught you. So for example, I don't know if you knew this, but you mentioned many years ago when I started to see you taking your daughter to different events, hockey games, WNBA games, all these different appearances and sporting events and all of that. I asked you, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. You went to watch that game or this game, and something that you said, I took with me
Okay.
for my time as a parent was you wanted your daughters to see people that look like them.
Sure.
You wanted them to see athletes that are successful in their craft or their field. So, for example, the WNBA.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, okay, that's a very different perspective, right? Because as a sports fan, I would love to have my daughter become a Yankee fan, right? But
Right.
but that's my interest. It's not necessarily her interest. But your approach as a parent, as a dad, trying to shape and form, your own children really resonated with me, and I've always appreciated that about you. I don't know if I told you that, but in that moment when you mentioned it, I jotted it down on my little notebook of life, and I said, all right, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to follow that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know that you've ever told me that. I mean, I think I've said things similar to that I do remember. I appreciate you saying that. So, right, growing up, right? So you and I both grew up in the 80s. And, obviously like in my house, whatever, like my parents were a certain fan, they like certain sports. But like my sister, for example, like she didn't really have anything professionally that she could necessarily like fully resonate to, because again, to that point, like there wasn't anybody she could watch on TV and see like, hey, I want to be like that person. Like that's the experience that I want. So I think it's fantastic that like the WNBA is getting bigger and bigger, especially with Caitlin Clark, who's amazing.
Right.
I love just going to like college sports with the girls. Like we took them to a couple of like Rutgers basketball games, little things like that. So they can look at it and they can say, you know, okay,
Yes.
so, you know, being an athlete or being whatever isn't just for the boys. Like I can do that. Again, nothing against people who, you know, let's say females who grow up to like the Yankees or males who grow up to like WNBA or whatever else like that. But I want them to have that opportunity to choose for themselves and not just say like, oh, I like such and such because my dad likes such and such. Here's an example. So like when my kids were younger, we tried to give them exposure to every sport that they could play. So we didn't say, hey, you know, you're going to play basketball, you're going to play hockey, you're going to play whatever. When they were younger, we basically had to each do like a season of each sport, and whatever stuck with them that they enjoyed, we had them do.
Right.
Because I didn't want to, you know, force my interest on them. I wanted them to kind of, you know, naturally figure out what they want to do. Now, after that, years later, Allison, my younger daughter, loves playing basketball, loves playing soccer. Robin, my older daughter, doesn't love doing sports at all. She does color guard and works in the marching band, which is absolutely fantastic. Love seeing it. A couple of weeks ago, they performed at MetLife Stadium. They came in first place, which was fantastic to see, right? Sitting in MetLife Stadium,
Nice.
where the Giants and the Jets and Metallica and Blackpink and Taylor Swift and all of them perform, and we're watching our daughter perform in front of, you know, the crowd, which was just so much fun. Like, love to see it.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's an incredible feeling for them as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I mean, because over the last couple of years, like I've taken Robin, my older daughter, just one-on-one, to the two of us, to go see Lady Gaga, to see Blackpink. We took her to see Taylor Swift. So she's on the same field that she saw those performers perform, which, again, I don't know that I necessarily dug into her and said, like, hey, do you recognize this, that, whatever. I mean, I think she might have mentioned, like, hey, I was where Taylor Swift was, which is really, really cool because she's a huge Swiftie. But, like, just having that experience and the pictures of her on the field with the MetLife sign in the background, it's just really, really cool, you know? It was a really good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Making memories.
Definitely making memories.
Which look back on that experience.
Yeah. So again, we enjoyed it. She enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And it's just great. And like as they get older, I think for me as a parent, my goal is just to kind of evolve with them, right? Understand what their interests are and just kind of like see what they like and just encourage it, right? You know, support it, do what they want to do. Don't say whatever. Like, here's one. So like when the girls were younger, obviously most kids go through a stage where they want to do whatever their parents do, or they want to kind of like, you know, go places their parents go to. So me as a lifelong wrestling fan, I took them to a number of wrestling shows when they were younger. When they were younger, they enjoyed it. They like getting pictures with the wrestlers, they like watching the show, stuff like that. But then there came a time where they got a little bit older, late middle school, early high school, where I said, hey, do you want to go to a wrestling show with me? And they're like, no, I think I'm good. I don't think I want to go. Which, again, internally was a little uncomfortable, a little painful, because I was kind of like, oh, you know, I enjoyed my time going to shows with them. But like, I would never look at them and say, no, we have to go, or this is our thing, we have to do it, right? If they're not going to enjoy it or they don't want to go, there's no reason to go. So I was like, okay, what would you like to do instead? Where do you want to go? So we've gone to the movies. I've taken them to different concerts. I took Allison to see Billie Eilish. I took Robin to go see Blackpink and Lady Gaga. You know, it's just, for me as a parent, it's about evolving and adapting to what they need and they want, as opposed to forcing, you know, my wants and needs on them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make a comment on your movie passion.
Yes.
You definitely leave us all on a cliffhanger on your Instagram, because you always check into these movies. And I've told you this before. This I have told you. I want to know after that movie, is it a thumbs up or thumbs down? Because if I'm going to make the trek to the movie theater, because I know you do it pretty religiously, I want to know if it's worth the trip. But you're a pretty positive guy. I mean, for all these years that I've known you, I don't think I've ever heard you say a negative thing. So I don't know if we'll get an honest review from the movie, but that's one suggestion box item that you could add to the list.
So it's a great comment. What I'll say is, you're right. I don't usually like. Well, I'll post that I'm going to see the movie like right before it starts, and when it's over, you know, racing to the car or trying to get home, whatever. What I'll say also though is, like, by doing that, it does create a decent amount of engagement. So what ends up happening is I post it, and then depending upon the movie or the weekend or whatever, a number of my friends will then reach out and say, "Hey, what do you think?"
Yep.
And I'll be super honest with people. So just in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a 2024 State of the Movies podcast. Excuse me.
Okay.
But with that said, look, I can look at the list right now, and I can tell you some of my favorite movies, and I can tell you some that weren't that good. So right off the bat, last week on the podcast, I talked about the fact that Disney no longer has the exclusive rights to Winnie the Pooh. So I think 90 years the trademark was up. So anybody who wants to can make a movie or use the characters. So a horror movie studio made a movie based on Winnie the Pooh called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Anybody at home wants to watch it or is listening, whatever.
I had no idea that was.
Oh, it's definitely
I'm jotting it down.
Yeah, so Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. It's on Peacock if anybody wants to watch it. There's also a sequel that came out shortly thereafter. What I would say is I think it's like a 4% Rotten Tomato, and rightfully so. Like, it is not a good movie. Real quick premise, and here's
the idea sounds awesome.
I mean, I thought so too. Like, this can be fantastic. Super low budget. It was made in Europe. I think probably like the day that the copyright ran out. So the general premise is this: the movie starts, and it's very dark in the woods in the forest. Christopher Robin left Winnie the Pooh and his friends to go to college. Winnie the Pooh and his friends are lonely and don't know how to eat or where to get food. Within the first minute, you find out that Winnie the Pooh and Piglet eats Eeyore because they were starving. Eventually, Christopher Robin comes back home, and then chaos ensues, and they basically kidnap and like abuse and torture Christopher Robin. So, I mean, that's like the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie. It doesn't get any better from that. I did watch the movie for research purposes. I watched the whole thing. It wasn't great. Will I watch the sequel for research purposes? Pretty good chance. I mean, it's on Peacock, right? It's not like years ago where you have to rent it or go to track it down. Like,
right.
I'm already paying for Peacock. It's there. So why not just check it out, right? So that was one that I would say,
Sure.
Not that good. 1992, I thought was an interesting premise. Not sure if you've heard about it. 1992 took place in Los Angeles, California, right after the Rodney King verdict. For those of you that aren't aware,
okay,
a bunch of white police officers on camera were caught beating a black man, and the white police officers were found not guilty, which then ensued in riots in downtown Los Angeles in 1992. For those that don't know their history about it, and then the movie went in a very different direction. It was okay, was not very good. I wanted to like it, but I didn't. On the flip side, and I'll talk more about it in a couple of weeks, the best movie by far this year, I think, was Ricky Stenicki. John, have you heard about Ricky Stenicki? No. Okay, so Ricky Stenicki. Okay, so Ricky Stenicki was on Amazon Prime, made for Amazon Prime. Stars John Cena and a bunch of other guys. Here's the general premise, and the premise is amazing. So the premise is this: 3 guys grow up together, great friends, and they're always getting into trouble. Whenever something bad happens, they blame a fictitious man or their fictitious friend named Ricky Stenicki. They would tell their mom when they were kids, like, "Oh, Ricky did it. Ricky set the house on fire. Ricky did this," or whatever. So as they get older, they all get married. They all, they're adults or whatever else like that, and they're still into trouble, and they're still blaming their buddy Ricky. So much so that, like, I don't know, I think one of their wives is going to go into labor, and he's like, "Oh, Ricky Stenicki needs us." They was like AC and like gambled and such like that. But then they eventually realized they needed a Ricky Stenicki, someone they could bring back to show after 30 years this is a real person, So they find John Cena, who plays Ricky Stenicki, and John Cena is amazing. I mean, if anybody knows anything about my fandom of John Cena, like, I love John Cena, but like, this movie took it to the next level. John Cena he's like a down on his luck, like a singer in like an Atlantic City like bar or like strip club or something like that. Like, he's just vulgar. He's ridiculous. They bring him home, but they give him like a whole like Bible they have of like who Ricky Stenicki is to kind of give him the history of Ricky Stenicki. This movie is fantastic. Like, John, go out of your way to watch it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's absolutely worth watching. So definitely do
that. That sounds really good. I jotted it down for sure.
Oh, it's so much fun. Definitely is. So we're 19 minutes into the podcast. We didn't even get to the topic yet. I'm sure someone's going to kill me and say, whatever the title of the podcast is, isn't remotely accurate because they didn't even get this far. So I did want to talk a little bit about the topic that John and I talked about earlier. So, little history lesson here. So John and I met again back in 2005. Not long after that, again, in 2005, we were both in our mid to late 20s. So maybe not at our prime. I'd say maybe a little past our prime for guys who sit in a cubicle all day. And at that time, let's see, martial arts was becoming like cool or like hip, right? So in high school, UFC began back in like 1993. And it was cool, right? It was just cage fighting. It was just like total chaos. Over the number of years, it kind of did what it did. But in 2005, a TV show called The Ultimate Fighter debuted, where it's basically a reality show to get the next UFC contracted fighter. I think it was around this time that John decided that, okay, well, if they could do it on TV, I could also be a mixed martial arts fighter. So John started training in that. My stupid behind started taking karate, and then eventually went to Tiger Schulman to do mixed martial arts at all. So I want to say it was a midlife crisis, but at 26 years old, it felt a little young to be in a midlife crisis. I mean, recently I joke this podcast is my midlife crisis, but we all figure ourselves out, I guess. So I wanted to give John an opportunity to talk through his memories of training in MMA and kind of like where it led and kind of like what he still feels, 15, 20 years later now, after his experiences.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. So thank you. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think we were sitting there in cubicles and watching this genre build, like, because I think as a kid, I was shaped by the whole Karate Kid phenomenon, right? Ralph Macchio and all of that was something that was very formative, I think, for our generation.
Yeah,
So much so that Netflix brought it back as a series. But if I think back as my childhood, I mean, there was the Karate Kid, there was the birth of Van Damme, there was
yes,
Seagal, there was a lot of, you would go to, dating ourselves again, but you would go to the video store and there were walls dedicated to martial arts. And
right,
as a kid, I was always intrigued by the martial arts. I practiced Taekwondo for uh, collectively probably about almost 4 years in total. So I started when I was younger, like 5 or 6, and then I stopped for a bit, and then I went back up until high school. And I've always just enjoyed the martial arts because it was something so different, right? Every style was different, and every character was somewhat different, and the specialties that each of them brought to the table was very different. So if you fast forward to when you and I met, that was like when UFC was starting to get itself going, and there were these characters, and these characters that were part of this reality show were just like everyday Joes. Like there was the school teacher that Rich Franklin at the time was a high school teacher, I believe, right? And he
yep,
was he was also a professional fighter. You had
right,
people like Travis Luter that were firemen. I think he was a fireman, and they humanized a bit of that, but that whole experience. But how I fell into it was just randomly. I was looking to get in shape. I played college sports. I played baseball in college. And I've always enjoyed just competition and that sort of thing. Once you get into the professional world, as you can imagine, it gets a little bit more mundane. And I was dating someone at the time that said, "Hey, well, let's join this gym. They have like a cardio kickboxing class." I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So I joined, and it ended up happening. It ended up being a former Army Ranger that had this gym that was teaching MMA. Um, and I didn't know any better, right? Like you just see it on TV. You've done a little bit of Taekwondo. You kind of have an idea of how your body moves and the different techniques that are effective, the ones that are not, and that sort of thing. And I honestly approached it just from a purely fitness perspective. I
right,
wanted to lose weight. I wanted to get stronger, that sort of thing. And I just joined the class. A couple weeks go by, and it starts to feel familiar because there was a period of time that I wasn't practicing anything. I was just kind of just doing your typical 5Ks and whatnot. Um, and I don't know. I just for some reason I got convinced that, hey, I should try this. I should give it a shot. So, and again, it was being blasted all over the TV. If you remember, there was
well, it
the,
was
the weekly
everywhere. It was
episodes,
all the
and
hype. Yeah, it was all the hype. It was on I think USA Network after Monday Night Raw every Monday night, or Spike or something like that. Like it was huge. Like it was
yeah,
becoming as big, if not bigger, than wrestling at the time.
right, exactly. So for me, WWE and WWF at that, when I was a kid, that was mainstream. So UFC was beginning to crack that kind of wall to break into the mainstream because it was being broadcast nationally, and the storylines of the different characters were really interesting. I mean, there were some phenomenal fighters that came out of that series, that
Yes,
first series that really broke through and really made them successful, and the equity that they are globally was really from that first series. I would argue. Um, but in any event, the coach at this gym or the owner of the gym was like, "Hey, you know, you should really give this a shot." And here I am working, at a consumer products company, from like call it 8:30 to like 5:30 or 6 every night, and
right,
yeah, you're going to the gym maybe 3 times a week. um, I don't know what made me think that, yeah, let me go and try cage fighting. Like, I don't know what I was thinking at that point in time, but honestly, the thought of the challenge was something that I guess maybe propelled me to at least consider it.
Had you wrestled or done anything like when you were in middle school or high school? Or I know you played baseball growing up. Did you do any of those sports?
No, no, honestly, that martial arts stopped. I did taekwondo up until high school. And then in high school is
Okay.
when I flipped it completely 100% towards baseball. That was
Okay.
my passion. It helped me get into a Division III program, and I was really happy that I pursued that. Um, I like I said, I didn't really pick up martial arts up until I met you and kind of got sucked into the whole swirl of UFC. But since then, I mean, up until my daughter was born 9 years ago, I found Muay Thai. I never
Okay.
trained Muay Thai before. I mean, your question specifically was around other combat sports.
Yes.
I never did wrestling. I never did jujitsu really. But when I started training MMA is when I got exposed to jujitsu. I got exposed to um, Krav Maga. No, no, not Krav Maga. Sorry. There was Wing Chun was one because
Okay.
that's something that the owner he was a former Army Ranger, but the owner of the gym was teaching as well. There's some techniques that you borrow from that discipline,
Nice.
and then and interestingly enough, Jerry Cooney, the legendary boxer, he came in and did a few clinics for us as well, so we could learn how to box and how to move and how to use our hands.
Nice.
Because what I learned in MMA was that Taekwondo really is more of like a distance sport. Like you fight someone kind of from a distance and you
Right.
use your legs predominantly. But once you add in the boxing component, then you learn how to use your hands a little bit more effectively and all. But um, so anyway, I don't know. I can't remember when I started training, but I think it took me probably about 4 months or 5 months to really say, okay, we're gonna do this. We're really gonna commit to signing up to a tournament, or not a tournament, but an event.
Yes.
There were 4 fighters from my gym that were going into this event. One of them had been training for a long time. The other one was actually a high school wrestling coach, so he actually knew what he was doing, and he was really strong. And then the other one was like a multiple black belt in both Taekwondo and karate. So, some pretty talented fighters that were part of my gym. Here I am, some like guy that's working, at a consumer products company that had dabbled in martial arts in the past and just figured it was a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a decision, right? So I think again, around the time that you were doing that, I was doing something a little lighter. Beth and I had always wanted to do karate, and there was a karate studio like a mile from where I live. So we're kind of like, okay, we're still kind of young. We don't have any kids yet. We were married at the time, but we're like, okay, let's go try it and do it out, whatever. So we went, and for us, while you're doing that, we went and did karate. But it was the exact opposite, I guess, situation than what you had. So it was basically, if you've ever seen the episode of Seinfeld where Kramer is taking karate, it's Kramer and a bunch of little kids. And he starts beating the heck out of the kids, and it's like, we're the same level. Because they have the same like color belt or whatever. Like that's basically the kind of school we were at. It was like Beth, me, and again, me and Beth were in our mid to late 20s, and a bunch of, let's say, I think 13 or 14 was probably the oldest that most of the people were in our class. So it was definitely an interesting situation. Very low to no contact. We did karate for a couple of years. Beth took some time off when Robin was born. But at the same time, we also eventually stopped doing karate because we found that we wanted to do it as a workout, but then we found out it was so light, at least the school was, that we still have to go to the gym or still work out after karate lessons. So we're kind of like, we're not even really
Right.
getting that out of it that we want to. So that really wasn't it. And then, John, I'll let you continue in a second in terms of your experience in terms of the actual competition. But then Beth and I eventually left karate and went to a Tiger Schulman's mixed martial arts. So for those that aren't aware, Tiger Schulman's, at least when I was a kid back in the 80s and 90s, was very big into like karate schools for the most part. As UFC got bigger, Tiger Schulman's evolves to the point where they have a few fighters that I think trained Tiger Schulman's that ended up fighting in the UFC. Um, and so they had jujitsu, they had kickboxing, they had all sorts of different things, which that was, for me anyway, a different experience altogether. Initially, I thought it was really cool. Um, but then eventually I very quickly realized like I don't like going to work in my cubicle job with a black eye. I don't like having fractured ribs. Like there are a lot of people who like they're training all day and all night and whatever else like that, trying to do something with it. And then you had me who's doing like 4 hours a week, and I'm just getting completely and utterly destroyed. And I'm fragile. I mean, I'll be the first to say it. Like I can't take a hit, I can't take a punch. I ended up competing in one kickboxing tournament, which if anybody wants to see it, the video of that fight is available on jeffseltzer.com. It was back in, I think, December of 2008. It definitely was something. Spoiler alert, I lost by decision. I did not get knocked out. I didn't tap out or lose. I didn't look great, but I did go against a guy who has a ponytail, which I've always joked about the fact that like this guy was built for fighting. And then there was just kind of me. So it was something. I learned my lesson very quickly. Eventually realized that, you know what, for the longevity of my life and my happiness, maybe I could just go to the gym. But that was just me. But with that said, John, so you were doing a number of weeks and months of training, and then you eventually decided that you wanted to sign up for a mixed martial arts or UFC style match. Can you take us through signing up for that and then the actual match? Which, on a side note, I'll just remind everybody out there, I do have a video copy of John's fight, although for years and for decades now, John has threatened me with all sorts of legal threats and trademark infringements that I can never publish it or share it out there. So I do have it. I'm not going to share it, but if somebody's really nice to me and wants to come to my house, maybe I'll show them something. Who knows?
Yeah, I would argue that was your first, foray into kind of the commentator world. I think that's where you got you got to hone your podcast skills, because you did commentate over it, which was great.
I did. And I think I did give you a copy. You still have the DVD, I assume, right? Because I think I recorded it on a video. I edited a DVD. So that was back when I was in my Seltzer video production days. I created a DVD of it, made two versions. One was just straight the audio they had there, and one of them in post-production, I did commentary, which I'm very proud of. I've listened back to, and my commentary is not very good. But it did happen, though. So it is there. I'm got to.
Well, the fight wasn't very good either, but that's okay. But yeah, I think the interesting part about that journey, because I reflect on it quite a bit, especially as we're nearing almost 20 years of when that event took place. I look back on it a ton, because one of the interesting things about martial arts is that it's a personal sport. Like, it's you. There's no team, right? And I've played baseball my whole life, and there's 9 people on the field, and yeah, versus martial arts, like, it's just you in the ring. Like, there's nobody else, and you either prepare or you didn't prepare, or So I've always looked at that as a really interesting learning or life lesson, because I think when people hear about martial arts, or mixed martial arts in this case, or cage fighting, they think about the kind of the brutal aspect of it, like, oh man, you're gonna get hurt. But what's interesting is how much strategy is involved in that sport, and how tactical and technical it can be, because ultimately you don't want to get hurt. You want to get out of there without injuring yourself, so that way you can fight again, right? And those fighters live off of being paid. I mean, we signed up for those events just for fun.
Yes.
So going back to that, I think our coach was really interested in getting his gym up on the map. And one of the local events was being hosted probably only like 15-20 minutes away from our gym. So he said, well, why don't I just put in my 4 fighters and see what happens? It was an amateur event. And like I said, ignorance is bliss, right? Like, there's things that you kind of have an idea about, and then there are other things you don't know. And what I started to do, once our coach signed us up, like, he signed us up and says, okay, you guys want to do this? All right, cool. So we started to really put some focus on it, and we started to train really hard against it. I went to visit a few events ahead of time to see if, like, perhaps I was going to run into somebody I may compete against in my weight class and things of that nature. One event I remember seeing with my brother, and we were like, okay, this seems pretty easy. Like, it didn't feel too, different than how we were training in the gym. And then we went to a second event, and that one was pretty scary. We're like, oh man, that could be me that just got knocked out, or like, oh man, that guy just got submitted, like he's passed out. So I would say it was like 50-50 still. So I really didn't have a formed opinion about how well or how poorly it was going to go. Okay. So again, here we are having full-time jobs, and we're kind of pursuing this kind of side passion, side kind of challenge, because I like to tell people, well, some people go skydiving. That's pretty darn dangerous, but no one really
Yes.
judges them for that, right? You and I just chose to go and do combat, right? That's
Yes.
a different challenge, right? It challenges you a little bit differently. Um, so here we are training for this, and throughout that training, I would leave the office 5:30, 6, drive 20 minutes to where my gym was. I would run 2 miles, two and a half to almost like 2.5 to 2.8 miles to get warmed up, then go to my classes, and I would train for about 2 hours at night, eat dinner like closer to like, I don't know, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then go back to work the next morning. Um, and like that's just not how professionals train, obviously, but this was an amateur event, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
But it just gives you an idea of like how much dedication, like our coach said it best. He said it's really a lifestyle. It can't be like a side hobby or anything like that, um, because there's a lot of nutrition involved. There's obviously all the training. I had to mix in lifting into it, and I even used the gym at our corporate office there in Parsippany
Yeah.
at Reckitt Benckiser. They had a small little gym, and I would work out there. I would do my lifting there, then drive, go run, and then do my classes. So,
Hey, John, can I add one
um,
thing real quick? That's actually funny that you
yeah,
just sparked when you said that. So about it being a
yeah, sure,
lifestyle. So when Beth and I did karate, I remember, I don't know, it's maybe like 6 months or a year into us doing karate. We were at an event, and one of the other, I don't know, competitors or people training, whatever, looked at me and goes, "Why do you do karate?" And I look him straight in the eyes and I go, "It's just something to do. I was bored. I just wanted something to do." I've never seen anybody look so angry and so disappointed at the same time. The fact that, like, for him, I think he might have had a tattoo for the karate school, and for me, it's just kind of like out of boredom. I just ended up here. So, like,
right.
he was just not having it. Beth and I quickly walked away because this was not going to work out, this conversation. But it just always stuck with me, the fact that, like, you couldn't have two different polar opposites, right? Like, we were there because it was something to do. We were curious. We were kind of
Sure.
bored. Versus this guy, like, this was his passion, and like anybody who wasn't their passion, like that, just he couldn't even imagine that, or he couldn't even fathom that. It just cracks me up, even years and years later. But at the time, like, just the look in this guy's face, like he wanted to hurt me, I think.
But that anecdote really speaks to the environment. Like that, this was the thing back then. Like
Yes.
MMA was exploding everywhere, and there was such a commitment across, both from the schools having to pivot and adjust and adapt to this new kind of desire from their consumer base. That we're really trying to capitalize on the emerging trend.
Yeah.
Um, but going up until the training piece, the ignorance and ignorance is bliss theme. There are things that happen throughout training. Like I ended up there like 11 days before my fight. Like there were things that like happened along the way that just didn't, like you don't count for. Um, so so I think those were the pieces that you kind of underestimate about how difficult MMA is and how combat sports is, or I guess any hobby in particular, that along the way, the training and everything that you go through, you to do it well, you have to really commit on all aspects. You have to sacrifice in all aspects. um, so anyway, here we are preparing and working really hard to get there. Like I said, surgery, couple dislocated toes.
Oh,
I ended up taking a bad roll in jujitsu one night, and I actually have severe arthritis in my neck now because
oh,
I have two
geez.
vertebrae that the disc are compressed. So all of that was just in the training. It wasn't even the fight yet, right? So
Right. This is
so
this is leading up to the
only
fight.
upside now from
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. You
So
definitely have longevity
there's a
waiting for you. Like, this is a long career ahead of you if you've already hurt yourself before you did your first fight.
Oh, no doubt, right? So here we are, the day of the fight. So because we were amateurs, we weigh in the day of, not the night before.
Right.
Um, and I had done so much training to try to overcompensate for some of my injuries that I had lost so much weight that I
Oh,
was I was only within 5 pounds of the lower weight class.
okay.
So I technically could have fought at a lower weight class and fought someone smaller than the person that I actually fought.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'll never be able to get back. But what was interesting of that day, right? So you go in and you weigh in and you see your opponent for the first time.
Right.
When I saw him in person, I started to really panic because the guy was taller. He was definitely bigger, from a muscular. He was really muscular,
Yes.
and very different than what I saw on the internet, right? So what I did in order to prepare for the fight, once the event card was published, I went and I tried to Google and find any information. There are typically videos out there. There were no videos of this fighter, but I did see still pictures. There
Okay.
were still pictures a photographer had taken during one of his previous matches. And in the photography, because the photographer was taking the pictures from below, like the cage, he
Yes.
seemed shorter to me. For
Oh
some reason, he just
no.
seemed super short. So I'm like, all right, I was like, I have this advantage. Like maybe I have ever. When I saw him in person, the guy was taller than me. He was bigger than
Uh,
me, and I had lost so much weight that I was definitely thin. So I start to panic, man. Like I was like, oh man, like this dude is really gonna mess me up.
mm,
Um, but obviously I had to put on a face like, I know what I'm doing. I've been training hard, and I had all hopes for the best.
right.
Um, come to find out, my trainer and I did work hard on visualization. We spoke a lot about, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to touch gloves. You're going to do this. You're going to move to the side. You're going to throw him a roundhouse. Then he's going to go to the side. You're going to throw a right hand overhand right. You're going to do
Right.
so. Like we had planned out the first round or so of the
Sure.
match, and
Was
also
what was
with
your opponent's
that
plan? Was your opponent's plan the same? That you're going to throw right at him, he was going to duck, or whatever else like that. It's not like wrestling where you guys
no, but
predetermined what was going on here.
no, no, but that's interesting you asked that because he by nature he's a jujitsu fighter.
Yeah.
So I knew that I wanted to keep the fight standing because that's
Oh,
my
100%.
specialty.
You don't
I
want to go
never
down, right?
wrestled.
Yes.
I don't want to go down, but I knew he wanted to go down. And the other part that I think played into it was kind of you psych yourself out.
Yes.
He already had one match before I fought him, so he was 1-0.
Yes.
It was my first fight. I didn't know what the hell to think or to expect.
Right.
Um, so so I was expecting him to come charging forward. And I was gonna say, all right, my Taekwondo skills will come in because then I could be more of a counter fighter, and that's kind of
Sure.
my sweet spot. He didn't charge forward, like he was waiting for me to do something, so it completely changed the game. Now, the last piece that I'll say about the photography was that it did tip his hand to one of the moves that he does. His specialty was a leg lock.
Okay.
That came into play later on. But in the first round, and I had already kind of thought about this as after I saw him at the weigh-in, and the weigh-in was early in the morning, somewhere around 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then the fight wasn't until the evening. So like I had all day to kind of stress about it and think about all the different
Of
ways that I
course.
was gonna, try to compete and try to win the match. I knew if I got out of the first round and we were both still standing, like I was gonna lose. I was certain that my cardio wasn't strong enough to kind of carry the fight for 3 rounds.
Oh no.
I knew that I was either going to knock him out or he was going to submit me. Those were the two outcomes that I thought.
Oh no.
Luckily, none of the two happened, right? So I ended up making it to the third, all the way down to the third round.
Yep.
Um,
Which
I
for
was
the record
exhausted. I was
which for the
definitely
record
exhausted, but
which for the record was fantastic for somebody who sits in a cubicle all day, then trains at night, and does all sorts of stuff. The fact that you made it all the way to a decision, like I was just blown away, right? Like
yeah,
you could tell by the stress in your face. I mean, whatever. The guy's more experienced. He already had a fight before, but the fact that you went
yeah,
3 full rounds and you made it that far, like that was amazing.
yeah, yeah. It was something that you just don't know how it goes. But there was so many things that I remember from that match because he in the second round he tried that move, that leg lock. He tried it,
Yes.
and I saw it coming, and I was like, "All right, this is it." And I was able to get out of that one. Then
Yep.
he locked in another one. That one hurt, but I wasn't gonna tap. Why? Because your wife, all of our coworkers were in the
Yes.
stands. My parents were in the stands. My
My
brother
video
was there.
my video
There
cameras.
was no way in that.
This predates smartphones, so I actually had a legit video camera with me recording it. And John was probably like, "I don't want that
That's
footage out
right.
there anywhere of me tapping out or whatever." Now, granted, in hindsight, the best UFC fighters will tap out before getting injured. But I mean, it's your first fight, and you're just kind of like,
No,
there's some ego involved there. There's probably a little bit of this and that. But I mean,
I
again,
had too
all
many
joking
people
aside,
watching.
I know.
I had too many people watching. I wasn't giving in. But what was interesting is like you think about the experience, right? You're standing there first round. You're looking across at this guy, and you're trying to project strength and courage and all these other things.
Right.
Then you fast forward to like the second round. I remember hearing certain instructions from my corner, but not like you tend to like get in this tunnel. You don't hear a lot because you're
You
just trying to survive
probably
and
got
kind
punched
of
in the ears. What happens? You probably couldn't hear as well.
probably that too.
Mm,
That too. And then in the last round, I just remember at that point it was just survival. Like I was just trying to
yeah.
make it through to the bell. But what was really neat about it though is that after the fact, he and I had a moment, and there was a lot of mutual respect between myself and Ted Ramones. He's all over social media and all, and he's actually come to find out he's a personal trainer. So the
Oh
guy's
wow.
jacked. Like he's a really fit guy. So the fact that I was able to survive that was actually a really really interesting and again a challenge. That's the reason why I took it. Um,
Right.
okay, so the fight ends, right, and I survive, right. I didn't get the outcome that I wanted, but then there was a part of me that was like motivated. I was like, okay, let me try this again because like if I trained a little bit more cardio, maybe I trained a little bit more wrestling, maybe I could be better.
Sure.
Um, so I ended up hiring a personal trainer that was in addition to my regular fight coach, and I was really working hard to get my strength up, my endurance up, all these other things. And then that's when like the rational thinking sets in, and you're like, wait, hold on a second. You could have actually gotten really hurt, and if you want to have any sort of like future where you can still use your arms and legs and things like that, like that's when I decided to just step away from it completely and not pursue that any further. Um, because it really taught me. It was like, wow, I was probably lucky that I
Yep.
was able to make it 3 rounds with that person. It taught me about preparation. Like there were certain things that I definitely learned about it. I like to say that I didn't get beat. I lost. I lost the fight. Like
Sure.
he didn't beat me. I kind of lost because there were some things that I probably could have done better. Could have worked more cardio. Could have worked more endurance. Could have trained a little bit more wrestling. Um, and then from that, like fast forward just up until like 10 years ago, I discovered Muay Thai,
Huh.
and man, I love Muay Thai. That's like one of my favorite sports, or arts, I should say, because of
Sure.
how um, there there's just a lot. The style is so um, it looks aggressive, but it's controlled. There's like this controlled aggression, I guess, that is in there. Um, and if you watch those fighters, they don't wince. Like they get hit, kicks, punches, elbows, you name it, and they don't wince. They just take it and they keep going, plowing forward and everything. And you gotta admire that, right? That takes a very it takes a different mindset, I would say,
Yeah.
when you're looking at some of those Muay Thai fighters. So I definitely recommend any to watch one of those Muay Thai matches from Thailand. They're really amazing. Um, so anyway, that's kind of like the whole journey around my MMA, where I tried it, thought it was great. It was definitely a little bit um, of rational thought that came to my head, and I was like,
Yeah, I'd say to that point, John. I mean, it
that made me
definitely was quite a journey. I mean, I would say, as an outsider and watching you train, like I was mesmerized, right? So like what I did with karate and mixed martial arts was basically nothing. It was kind of like a hobby, whatever. I mean, the fact that you trained quite a bit, you actually went and had a fight, like I thought it was incredible, right? Just watching you in a fight, like I was just blown away at the time. I'll say also the fact that your fight was at the Rahway Recreation Center, which for
yeah.
me was also a bit of a high because I had seen Jersey All Pro Wrestling multiple times there.
Oh, cool.
Even now in 2024, WrestlePro has independent wrestling shows in that same building. So for me, every time I go there to see a fight or to see a show, I'm like, hey, this is where John fought years and years ago. So for me, it's just got like great memories for that. Like I mentioned earlier that I had taken my daughters to go see wrestling a few times. I've taken them to the Raleigh Rec Center, and multiple times I've mentioned like, hey, a buddy of mine actually had a legit like MMA fight here, which is always
Yeah,
just for me just intrigues me. It's just kind of a funny little piece of trivia. I absolutely just love it. It's just awesome. With that
yeah.
said, we are running late on time. Do you have anything that you want to promote or support before we call it a day?
Not support, but just to give myself a pat on the back. The guy that I fought and lost to, he ended up fighting for the title in the amateur circuit. And he lost to someone who had actually made it to the UFC. So that makes me a contender, I would say.
Nice. That's very cool. It's kind of like for me, for my kickboxing tournament that I had the one fight in. I always like to brag about the fact that I lost my one fight, but I lost by decision. The guy that I fought ended up winning the championship by knocking out his opponent in the final round. So for me, at least I
Oh
didn't
wow.
get knocked unconscious. I was okay. I, for the most part, came out unscathed. And for me, obviously, it could have been a lot worse, like it was for the person who lost the championship. But it all worked out okay for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So with that said, John, thank you for joining the podcast this week. Really, really appreciate it. Want to thank everyone for joining, listening, and watching as always. A reminder, we are on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. You can email us at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. You can check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. We have a few more weeks coming up of shows throughout the rest of this year. We'll probably take a little bit of a hiatus, probably late November, early December. More to come on that as lots of busy stuff's coming up, but definitely have a solo pod coming up. Definitely have a podcast talking about the best and worst movies of 2024. I'm sure a few others will come up as well, so we'll see what happens. Definitely shoot me a note, send me a DM if you want to be a guest. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk next week. Thanks, everyone.